Hello and welcome to Season 4 of On the Irregular with me, Java Berry. In previous seasons, I've chatted to women from all walks of life about their unique creative journeys, how they got here and how their story has shaped their creative process. For this season, I wanted to specifically explore the way in which grief informs the creative process, how transformative it can be, and how it weaves its way through our lives in many tangled ways, how it manifests in our work, and how we navigate the endless twists and turns. I cannot wait for you to hear these conversations. Each one moved me in a profound way, and often made me laugh and cry simultaneously. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to On the Irregular Season 4 on creativity and grief. In this episode, I talk with writer, poet and playwright Cordelia O'Neill. We discuss Cordelia's play, Anything is Possible If You Think About It Hard Enough, about a young couple whose baby is born still. We discuss creativity as a tool for developing empathy and how experiencing loss can bring you closer to joy, love and hope. And we talk about the twist of fate where Cordelia's life imitated her art. This episode includes swearing and an in-depth and detailed conversation about our personal experiences of late-stage termination for medical reasons, so please be aware before listening. Welcome to my chat with the tender and ever so lovely Cordelia O'Neill. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me, Cordelia. Welcome to On the Irregular podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'd love it if you could just start off telling me a bit about your background. You're a poet and a writer, but if you'd like to tell me a bit more about your backstory, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, so I trained as an actress at the Oxford School of Drama quite a few years ago now, and then moved to London when I was 21, and tried desperately to work as an actress for about 5 or 6 years, and through the sort of frustrations of that started writing, and I wrote a play called The Stolen Inches, which I did a scratch night for, and then I did sort of directed and produced it myself at this weird little cellar in Dalston, and then took it to Edinburgh. And I thought, okay, well, we'll take it to Edinburgh, and if it's a flop, great, I know that's done. I never have to do it again. And it went really, really well. And so I wrote another play called No Place for a Woman, which went on at 503, and then had a few commissions in the middle of that, and then wrote my play Anything is Possible If You Think About It Hard Enough, which was meant to go on in 2020, but then COVID happened, and then went on a year later in 2021, which did really, really well. And I'm really proud of that play, and the team and everything was just wonderful. And then wrote my current play, Remember When, which I'm trying to get on at the moment. And then in between that have written, it's very sweet, you call me a poet. I don't know if any poets would say I am, but have dabbled with poetry, and I'm dabbling with other forms of writing at the moment, and the odd screenplay. And I live in London with my daughter and my husband.
I'm interested to know, your play, Anything is Possible If You Think About It Hard Enough, you sent it over, and we're going to talk about this. And but had you had Delilah by that point? Had you become a mother?
No. So I started writing that play in 2017, and children weren't even a thought. And a friend of mine was pregnant with her son, and she was the first friend to be pregnant, and it was all incredibly, incredibly exciting. And at 38 weeks, she went in for her scan, and she found out that he had liquid on his brain. So he had a condition called hydrocephalus. And I remember her telling me about this and saying that they were having MRIs and more scans, and they had to wait to see how significant the damage would be. And if the damage was so significant and his quality of life was completely affected, then they would have a late termination. And he wasn't. He's absolutely fine, and he's an amazing little boy now. But I remember being completely astounded by the idea of having a late termination at 38 weeks. And I almost didn't really think it was possible. And finding it very, very hard to know how to support her, and what to say. And so I went to Google, and just found so much information and so many stories of women who had stillbirths and miscarriages and infertility problems, and it was just like this pot of hidden stories that me, as I think 27, 28-year-old woman, had never ever come across, or even thought about. And so I decided that I had to write about that, and the silence and the complicated feelings and the isolation around it. But no, I hadn't had children. And then I was pregnant with Delilah when we went into rehearsals at the beginning of 2020. And then obviously everything shut down because of COVID. And then by the time we opened in 2021, Delilah was 1. And actually coming back to the play after had Delilah was very strange and different, because I had an awareness of what it was you would lose.
Would you like to just explain briefly the premise of the play?
Yeah, so it follows a couple called Rupert and Alex, who kind of meet by chance and sort of meet cute on the tube, and they fall in love, and they sort of fight and try and get by, and they fall pregnant quite quickly, and then their baby Teddy is born still. And then the second half of the play is an exploration of their 2 different types of grief and how they don't really align until right at the last minute, when they come together. And what I suppose brings them together is the openness of the grief and the revealing of the dark soul you have when you lose a baby, and just like letting that exist. And they dance ferociously. Yeah. But the play, I think, is hopefully really about hope and love, and how sadness and happiness exist in the same place, and how beautiful that can be if we allow it. Yeah. And we don't silence the sadness.
Yeah. I mean, when I read it, knowing that you hadn't experienced loss when you wrote it, it was quite astonishing how accurate I found it in so many ways, because we had a late stage termination at 6 months with our daughter Alma, and the way you talked about grief afterwards, and there were a few moments like when they're dressing for the funeral. And I remember that so clearly, dressing for Alma's funeral, and just feeling so strange, like, how do I choose clothes for my child's funeral, and adorning myself and wanting to look nice, and it was just that, like, details like that. And then there's a moment where she goes to Paper Chase and buys a load of cards that say it's a boy, and crosses out a boy and writes in black marker, it's dead, and then sends them to her friends and family. And again, like, the brutality of that was like, this is incredible that you could understand that and see that. And I was like, you were saying that you were pregnant at the time when you went into rehearsals, and then had Delilah, and revisiting it, that must have been quite extraordinary, and you must have felt quite fragile and vulnerable, I imagine. Not to project, but I know, like, being pregnant is such a vulnerable stage in a way anyway.
It's the director, my gorgeous friend Kate, was pregnant also, so there was 2 pregnant women in rehearsals for a play about stillbirth, and that we laughed about it. and I think that was our way of dealing with the very on the nose circumstances of the rehearsal period. I think I felt more fragile once I'd had Delilah, and in a very weird way, which is funny now because of what happened. But I honestly felt like, because I'd written a play about stillbirth, rehearsed it, put it on, spent time with bereaved mothers and fathers, bereavement midwives, researched the play, had gone fully into it, that I was protected completely and utterly from it ever happening to me.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I just felt the irony of me having a stillbirth could never happen, because that's ridiculous. Which then, of course, it did happen this year. But in the rehearsals, I honestly felt the shield around me, and but what probably wasn't aware of the delicacy of it, really, because I've not experienced it. Yeah.
That's extraordinary, because I was wondering about your research process, because there are quite specific things in there that I kind of like, how would you know that? Because like you said, with your friend, when you when she was going through everything with her baby, and whether they were going to have a termination or not, and you didn't know what to do, so you turned to Google. And I really, recognized that from when we experienced it. People just didn't know what to say and couldn't begin to put themselves in that situation, because it isn't something that people previously, I think there's a lot more conversation about it now, but at the time people really didn't talk about it. And I remember someone saying to me, "Oh, you're now part of the secret club." And a lot of people started sharing their stories with me, and I was like, well, why have I never heard these stories? These are really profound and huge and tragic. And so did you approach people to talk to about this? Did people share their stories with you?
Yeah, they were amazing. My husband knew a producer who produced a TV show called I can't remember what it's called. It's awful. A Child of Mine, which was on the BBC, and it was narrated by Amanda Holden, and it followed 3 couples during losing their babies. So we got in contact with them, and we met a couple called Fiona and Niall, and they spent so much time with us, telling us about their daughter Matilda. And then through them, we met another woman called Alex, and she told us about her daughter called Sky. And then we met Petal's charity, and Tommy's charity, and Sam's. And then they linked us to bereavement midwives, who then linked us to more bereaved parents. And then one of the weirdest things was when it was announced that we were doing the play, and when we would talk to people about the project that I was working on next, and who who was involved, and what the play was about, so many people said to me, I lost my daughter, I lost my son. And so I actually remember a Q&A we did after the show one night, and a guy called David Monteith, who runs a charity called Grace in Action, after his daughter Grace, asked the audience, he said, put your hands up if you've had a stillbirth. And I'm not joking, the whole room, everyone's hands was up. And so it's like, once you open it up, we're everywhere. We are everywhere. But very silently, very silently. And the thing that I found astonishing is how many people want to talk and be open. And I was so scared when I first started interviewing people that they'd be like, don't ask me that, please don't go there. But people really want to go there. So I was incredibly lucky that people shared their stories with me, and was so vulnerable with me, and it made the play what it was. and I'll be so grateful. And actually, in the play text, in the published play text, we got mothers and fathers to write in a letter to their babies, which is the beginning of the play, which, you know, was amazing.
Gosh, that's incredible that people could share their stories with you,
Yeah.
and it must have been quite, I imagine, quite healing and refreshing for them to be able to share it in that way and to be listened to.
Yeah.
Because I remember a few times when we lost Alma, a few friends said, "Oh, don't worry, you don't have to talk about it."
Yeah.
I remember thinking, no, I really want to talk about it. I
Mm.
really I need to talk about it. I
Mm.
need to go into the detail,
Mm.
you know, and tell you. And I felt quite brutal about it. That's something that I really found in your play, so recognizable and so clear, was like the brutality, because you've experienced death in quite, in a physical sense as a mother,
Mm.
um and and then how difficult that is for the other parent who hasn't borne the child to, how do they grieve when it's, and when they can feel helpless. But yeah, the anger, and I think you wrote in your email, the hardcore emotion. It really comes across, just like I said, like sending out postcards telling, saying it's dead to your friends and family when you're expecting to send cards saying it's a boy or it's a girl.
Mm.
And so how long after the production of the play did you become pregnant with August?
A year almost, actually. Now I think about it. Yeah, a year. So the play finished in October 2021, and I found out I was pregnant with August in beginning of November. So around this time last year, actually, 2022, and we decided to start, trying and just see what happens, and fell pregnant straight away. So it was a shock. It was a real shock. Before I popped onto this Zoom, I listened to your podcast and I listened to your episode about Alma, and you said how angry you were about not being able to go to the not get pissed at the Neil Diamond concert. Really related to that. I was like, I haven't had enough prep, but I haven't had enough wine. And we had loads of really fun things happening. And I just thought, oh, fuck, Christmas is going to be really boring. And just, being like, what?
Yep.
So that really made me laugh. But yeah, so it was really, really unexpected. Well, it wasn't, but it was that it happened.
Yeah.
So I fell pregnant with him in November, and I'm an awful pregnant person. Everything that you could possibly throw at a pregnant woman, I get. With Delilah, I just vomited nonstop for 3 months, and so quite quickly with August, all of that started, and extreme tiredness, and I was just fucking miserable. And especially with a toddler.
Oh God, yeah, it's so hard.
It's hard. It's really hard. And a job. And I just remember like walking to Delilah's nursery at like 5 o'clock, and it was pitch black, and I'd just been sick and I felt awful. And I just remember being like, this is awful. Why do we do this? And actually bumping into a friend and just saying to her, I'm pregnant and I don't know why I'm pregnant. Really, really hating it. Hating it more so than I did with Delilah, because I think with the first it's so new that you just take it more. But with the second, that you could feel different and that you will feel different, so you just want it to be sped up. Yeah. So then we went, then we had our 12-week scan in January, and everything was fine, and my bloods were a bit funny, so they did some extra tests, but they said that everything was absolutely fine. And then I remember going home and thinking, oh, great, we've got to 12 weeks. I'm going to start to feel better. And I didn't. And I started to feel worse and worse and worse. And I just couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't work. My brain was like fog. And there was just no lift. And I just remember thinking, I just need to get to July when August was due. I just need to get to July. And I'm just going, this is just a really tough pregnancy, and having a toddler and working and being pregnant and it being January, it's just all a lot of bad things.
Yeah.
So I just kept pushing through and just hoping that something would lift. And I actually remember going to my midwife appointments and saying to them, this doesn't feel right. I feel really bad. And then kind of just brushing off and being like, do more exercise, or what are you eating? But I think I sort of knew that something was off. And then we went to our 20-week scan, but it was actually the 22-week scan. We just had it quite late for some reason. And he wasn't moving much. And so we couldn't get him to turn so we could see his spine. And so the sonographer called in a consultant, and she, they were really trying to get him to move, and they couldn't get him to move. And then they just spent hours and they just sort of talked to themselves. And then they turn around and look at you, and you sort of sit up. And she said, I think you've got placenta insufficiency and low amniotic fluid. So your placenta is not really working properly. And so it's growing and getting bulky, and it's squishing your baby and the amniotic fluid, which is why he can't move. She said, it happens all the time. We've just got to really, really monitor you. And then probably induce early labor at 30 weeks.
Right.
And I was like, what the 30 weeks? You can't have a baby at 30 weeks. And just completely spiraled, and me and my husband had loads of questions, but I couldn't really speak, but he kind of was like firing out all these questions, and we were booked in for a scan in a month, and we were told to just go home, and that everything really would be fine. We just had to be very careful. So we were kind of looking at a month of waiting to see if he would grow, if the placenta would improve slightly. She sort of said, you have to come back in a month, because then I can see change significantly. If you come back next week, I won't be able to see that much change. So let's really give your placenta and give your baby time to get stronger. But I couldn't wait that long. And Google midnight searches and 5 a.m. searches were just sort of ruining my life. And a friend of mine just said, just go and get a fucking scan, just demand one. So I rang up and I said, I just need a scan, and you just need to, I can't do this. And we spoke to a midwife, and she said, actually, we've just had your bloods back, so we would like you to come in, as you've had 2 blood infections. And she says, we're going to take your bloods and we're going to send them, and we're going to find out when you had these blood infections, which I just think is remarkable. And then we can see if it's had an impact on your baby. And honestly, I just was like, oh, okay, fine. But what about the placenta? And we went in for the scan, and the baby had grown, August had grown, and the sonographers were really happy, and they were like, yeah, this is really good. And then the same consultant came in, and she said, she started doing like a vigorous scan and being really specific. And there was just a change in the room. You could tell that the sonographers were like, oh, we've got to step up. And you could tell she was like, this is serious. Of course, no one told us that, but you just sense it.
Yeah.
And then she turned around and she said to us, "I'm worried. You had 2 blood infections. You had toxoplasmosis, which is what you get from cats. And I knew all about it. I remember reading about it when I fell pregnant with Delilah. And she said, and you've had a blood infection called CMV, which I'd never, ever heard of. Mm-hmm. And CMV is just like a cold that you just get really from toddlers. It's all around nursery, and everyone will have it eventually. And once you've had it, that's it. You're done. It's like chickenpox, and you're immune. But if you have it in your first trimester, it's incredibly dangerous. And she says, I'm looking at your baby's brain, and there is subtle changes that are making me worried. So we're going to do an amniocentesis, and then we're going to do an MRI. And so we did the amnio, and then I went home, and then we waited for the MRI. And I mean, you actually talked about this in your podcast, but we were like 23, 24 weeks then. Mm-hmm. And so you have this like 24-week mark where the choices over your baby's life are no longer yours because of the cutoff of termination. Yeah. And I remember being so worried about that because we were hearing all this bad news, and Phil and I had to work out, you have to know what you can handle as a couple, and what you want to bring into your life. And everything that we were hearing was that your baby will be incredibly, their quality of life is going to diminish significantly. They won't have a life, essentially. And Phil and I really wanted to be in charge of that decision. And so we had this like 24-week mark that I was just obsessed with, but we had to keep waiting for more and more tests. God. And I remember going to pick Lila up from a friend's house and being like, I just want it to be done now. It's not good. And now I look back on that and I think I just wanted to terminate my pregnancy. And I wanted to end my baby's life. And that's such a bizarre place to be in. It's essentially parenting. You're making decisions that go against your, instincts, because you're just trying to think about what's best for this baby. But I remember really struggling with that and being really obsessed with this date. And then it was 25 weeks and we missed it and we'd lost the control. And then we went in for an MRI and then came back the next day. And she said, so your amniotic fluid is full of CMV. It's just full of it. And your baby's brain is significantly brain damaged. So we're really going to suggest a termination for medical reasons. And I just remember being completely relieved, and this like peace, which I just find bizarre. But it'd been such a battle for such a long time, and this instinct that I had that everything wasn't right from the moment, from like 15 weeks, essentially. From even when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, this is all too quick, I just remember being so relieved and calm, and just sat in this room with my husband, and people coming in and out and signing forms and people talking to you and tilting their heads and asking you how you are. And I was just serene. And then we went in and you have an injection that stops your baby's heart. And the whole thing was just bizarre. The whole thing was incredibly bizarre, that we had the consultant there, we had lawyers there, and we had HR there. So it was full of people. And then we had the guy that ran this Harris Birthright clinic in London, which is the best fetal medicine clinic in the country. And he's this amazing, eccentric Greek guy. And he was just talking to me about mortgage rates. And we just moved to Sydenham from Dulwich, and he was like, "Oh, you're going down in the world." And my husband was like, "Because it's because of you fucking baby boomers, that's why." And I was lying there, injecting my baby's heart with poison, and I mean, so many people, when I tell that to people, are so angry with him and so shocked at him, and actually it was like. It was perfect for Phil and I, and only like now looking back on it, do I see, and I don't know whether he did it intentionally, I don't know whether he's just mad, I don't know, but what he did was he showed me that I could have a normal conversation, and he showed me that in the darkest moment of my life I could engage with something else. And he treated me like a normal person, and I hadn't been normal for quite a long time, and I'm incredibly grateful to him for that.
Yeah,
and it held me, and so I really am very fond of him. And then we go home, and you have to wait 72 hours, and the midwife told us to go for a walk the next day, and I kind of wish we hadn't gone for a walk, because now I can't go back to that park, but I wish we'd just sort of stayed inside. And then I went into hospital and was induced. And in your podcast, my husband did exactly the same thing as Jon. He went to M&S honestly, and bought so much food.
It's like a hunter-gatherer instinct or something, isn't it?
It is.
But like the middle class version.
Yeah. Exactly. There's just so many Percy pigs, like all the different types. I just remember thinking, oh my God, these doctors are going to think we're so unhealthy. And then I gave birth to August, and I had a epidural, and sort of was asleep. It was just like having given birth with no pain relief with Delilah, and having given birth with August with like a lot of drugs and a very little like physical pain. That they're just remarkably different. And I'm like, gosh, there's a choice. We don't have to go through that awful pain. Why aren't we all just having epidurals all the time? But and then I gave birth, and he was taken away and dressed and then brought back in. But again, your podcast is remarkably similar. Like Phil really could hold him and kiss him and be with him and touch him and engage with him, and I found it quite hard to. But Phil sang, and we tried to sing a song, but we couldn't remember the words, and then we had photos taken. It's like, it's such a gift, but it's so sad. It's so sad. And then he was taken away, and then Phil just said the most remarkable thing. He was like, it's like it never happened, because it's so silent and calm and quiet, and when, especially because we'd had Delilah, we linked birth with like hecticness and loads of people coming in and out and crying babies and noise and busyness and tests and checks, and we were just left to it, and it was quiet, and that I just always remember that it's like it never happened.
And the way you described in your play Anything Is Possible If You Think Hard, if you think about it hard enough. You described it so perfectly. You described the birth and about how it felt like you were being. Was it in the play or was it in your speech that you sent me about, from August's funeral, where you described the birth and it's like you were held?
Oh, it was August's
Was it
speech.
was it August's speech? Was that?
Yeah.
And that was the first time. That was the first time when I read it that I have been able to put words
Mm.
to how it felt. That's exactly like you said. Like it was, yeah. This is this kind of peace, and like the world was dark, but it was like we were in a womb and held. And I think, yeah, you said maybe it was you because you were at peace, or maybe it was the drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, we will never know. But
Yeah.
it was quite it was really I think, I don't know what the word is really, but it was lovely in a way for me to, been really emotional for me to read, and I sobbed
Mm.
my way through your speech,
Oh.
which we'll talk about later. But yeah, that's such a perfect description. And I think because you think of it as this tragic thing, and of course it is incredibly sad, but like you said, it is also so beautiful, and that's the time that we have to meet them.
Yeah.
and and yeah, we'll never know the color of their eyes or
Yeah.
the sound of their cry.
Mm.
Have that moment, and it was beautiful and peaceful and calm.
Yeah, it really is. And actually, if I hadn't have written the play and I hadn't have written and spoken to so many women and men who'd gone through it, I might not have done it, I might not have realized that's what you need to do.
Mm.
Because I don't know if you felt this, but I was terrified.
Mm-hmm.
I was terrified. And I remember when I had to push, it was real. It was real. And
Yeah.
it was actually happening. And I just remember saying to Phil, my husband, I'm not doing it. I'm too scared.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would have been too scared had I not been prepared by the
Mm-hmm.
play, which is why art is so important.
Well, that's what I found interesting in your email. You said that the play gave you the tools to begin surviving the grief.
Mm.
That's so interesting that you could identify that from the play that you'd written.
Yeah, well, I think it's I remember, when I first started researching the play and learning about terminations for medical reasons and for stillbirths and for babies that die maybe 3 days after birth, that you spend time with babies. And I remember being shocked by that, because the last thing anyone wants to see is a dead baby.
Mm.
And bereavement midwives and parents explaining why it's so important in the grieving process, and why it's so important for the mothers and fathers, because you can be that baby's mum and dad for those moments. And so I learned that not pretending it hadn't happened and not seeing the baby was probably more destructive than accepting the fear.
Yeah.
And I spoke to a woman when I wrote the play who was in her 70s, and she had her little baby girl Eliza when she was about 25. And as soon as Eliza, her baby, was born, the baby was taken away and she wasn't allowed to see her, and she never saw her. She never buried her. She had nothing to take home. She had nothing. And then she went to work the next day. And she's never got over that. So I knew what you had to do, and I knew that it would be the healthiest and the best thing. And no matter how scary it was, I owed it to this baby, to August, that I'd just birthed, who had lived, who I'd felt move, who I'd named, who I'd carried, who I'd imagined. I owed it to him to be with him for a while, and to be his mother in this new form of motherhood. but you know, despite all that, I was shit fucking scared and
Yeah.
and shaking and uh and now I look at it and I can see what it was, but in that time I just remember thinking, this is not my life, this is not my life,
Mm-hmm.
this isn't real, this just isn't real.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, I wonder if I'd have known to do that had I not spent so much time with this play and these people and the stories and understood the significance of it.
Yeah.
I perhaps would have been too scared or too scared to step into the fear, if that makes sense.
Yeah. 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 I can understand that.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing that you wrote in your email, which I thought was really interesting, when you said that creativity helps explore the fear around life.
Mm.
I think that's such an interesting point, because it is, yeah, it's the scariest place to go, but it's also kind of where the really meaningful, interesting stuff is in many ways, and the stuff that can develop empathy and
Yeah.
a deeper understanding of love as well, which is something that you said that your play is very much about, is about love and about hope.
Mm.
And in a way, you can only fully understand the love and the hope if you can face the fear
Yeah.
and explore that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I don't know if you found this, but after we lost August, we had a 3-year-old, you know, to look after. Well, 2.5-year-old to look after. So you have to like leave the house.
Yeah, just get on with it. Yeah.
And you really have to. You really have to. And so we really quite quickly like bumped into people that perhaps I just wasn't ready to see yet, and really good friends
Mm-hmm.
and and I remember seeing people for the first time, maybe like only like a week after it happened, and I remember them seeing me, and most people did this, and just the fear in their eyes, and this like what's going to happen, now, because
Mm-hmm.
she's just gone through this trauma, and I don't know what that does to people, and they, you know, that you could just see that fear, and some people just, which I loved, which I thought was amazing, just burst into tears and just said, I'm so sorry, and held me and hugged me and just went for it, you know,
Yeah.
just went, this is fucked, let's just fucking cry in the middle of a farmer's market, you know. And then other people just retreated, and asked how work was, you know, or
Yeah.
um, and it's just so interesting. It's just so interesting to see that in people, and the people that just went for it and cried, and we all, you know, we stood there and cried, and they asked what happened, and they asked what was going on, and it freed everything up, and it allowed us to move through this pain and trauma together. And then 20 minutes later, go get a coffee and order a shashuka. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
we just could live. And the people that stopped it and didn't say anything and was scared of that leap, you couldn't talk to them and you couldn't be there with them.
Yeah.
And it's because I think when people go through trauma, people assume that that person is weakened and damaged and like going to go off at any moment. And I've actually felt incredibly powerful from it. And I've actually felt that August has given me this strength that I didn't know humans could have. And I sort of wish people saw that more. or allowed that more. But people are scared of sadness and what that does. So, which is, why child loss is so hidden and so complicated, and the conversations around it are so tepid and eggshelly. But I think trauma is power, and I really want to try and harness that as much as possible. And if you don't believe that, then it will destroy you. And so you have to believe that, and everyone else has to come on that journey with you, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an incredibly powerful I guess takeaway from it, because it is easy to see it as something that debilitates you, but I can really relate to that. And I think that in what you were saying about exploring the fear around life, I think in some ways it also can help you feel fearless, or even not just fearless, but kind of just more, just giving less of a fuck. And I completely relate on the level that I feel that, experiencing Alma's death and having to make that decision, life and death decision, and all of these things, and experiencing that, I kind of came out of it the other end, just kind of like thinking, like, fuck this, I'm just gonna, be who I need to be and do what I need to do, and on many levels, and creatively as well. And
I'm a real big believer in honesty. And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, because who isn't? But I don't believe we exist in an honest world.
Yeah.
And so much of my frustrations with the world and society are just not getting to like the nub of something.
Yeah.
But I am not always an honest person. Like,
yeah,
we're all complicated, and we all don't exist authentically.
Your writing is very frank.
Right. Yeah.
It's very frank, and like you said, it's straight to the point and can be quite disarming and a bit uncomfortable. But that's where I think where the interesting stuff is.
Yeah. Exactly. It's not small talk, I guess.
Yeah. So just coming back to August, and like you're saying, afterwards, just having to get on with your life. You're still a parent to Delilah, and life carries on, and the grieving process. And then you kindly sent me your speech from August's funeral, and it's so beautiful, Cordelia. I think I feel so grateful that you sent it to me, because the type of funeral that we had, we didn't have the opportunity to say words. We had a little ceremony just ourselves when we buried her ashes, but I found in your words, you gave me words that I really felt, and it was so tender and so beautiful and generous and kind, and your love for August just shone through. And sorry,
no,
it was really, really powerful to read. So thank you so much for sending that.
Thank you.
And I don't really know what to say other than this is what's so, like you said, what's so powerful about creativity and being able to share that, is that you can offer by being able to share your words and your experience and what you felt, you can offer, I don't know if it's like a way of processing for other people to be able to process it in a different way, because sometimes it is hard to put into words, or you kind of have this feeling but you don't quite know how to express it, but then somebody else expresses it for you, and it's like a sigh of relief somehow, being able to acknowledge it and identify it.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's connection, I guess, and you just feel so isolated in grief. So when something pops up that ends that, it's magic. Thank you for reading it. I actually hadn't read it until this morning, so since the funeral. So I was surprisingly I before meeting you, I listened to your gorgeous podcast with your husband, and then read my speech from my son's funeral. So I wasn't quite sure what state I was going to be in, but I feel so lucky that I was able to say that to him. And I remember people saying after so we had a cremation, and then after the cremation we had a memorial, and I remember people saying, like, how do you feel afterwards? And I felt like he'd arrived, which was, so strange, because we were marking that he'd left, but I honestly felt like he'd just landed into that room that day. Which is why, celebrating life and funerals and memorials is so important, and such a privilege. But yeah, no, I really, and I think that was because of everyone that was there and the sharing of the grief finally. But yeah, no, I mean, I had this idea when I first started planning the memorial that I was going to write him a play, and I was going to get all my friends who are actors to act out this play.
Like a puppet show.
Do you know what I was? I was sort of thinking more like a musical. I was like, oh, that would be so moving. Thank God I didn't do that. Because I know that all my gorgeous friends would have done it.
Yes.
They would have been there, scripts in hand, acting out a play about actually what even about. That's brilliant.
Brilliant.
I've been saying to my husband, I think I'm going to write him a play, Phil. I think, and he was just like, oh, okay. And said nothing more. But eventually I wrote this like quite quickly, and yeah.
I think you said in your email a bit about how you listlessly you wanted to write, but you couldn't find your way, and but you had this urge that you wanted to create something. It's like, I feel like I can create something beautiful from this.
So I hadn't, when I contacted you, I hadn't written anything substantial or concrete or of any, like, other than August's speech, anything that made sense. I think I was quite angry for a while that I had written a play about stillbirth, because I felt like if I hadn't have written Anything Is Possible If I Think About It Hard Enough, I could have just poured all my energies into a play about that. And I didn't have that. I'd already done that.
Is there anything that you feel you would have written differently?
I don't know. Lots of people ask me that. I don't think so. I really don't think so. I mean, I think I could put in my own experiences and my own feelings that now, but I think that it would be an overload. I think the scene where they talk about having a new baby, I would perhaps revisit, because I don't know if you felt this, but as soon as I'd had August, I was just right, and I'm pregnant now, but
oh gosh, congratulations.
Thank you. But I was like, we've got to get pregnant straight away, without, it's not even up for debate. Phil, your opinion is insignificant. We've just got to start going for it. And I think I would just examine that like that feeling of emptiness more, because I definitely felt empty in like in an extremely torturous way. So yeah, maybe just examine that slightly more. But no, I don't think so. I don't think I'd want to mess with it
It
again.
is, it is extraordinary, and it also, it's testament to your empathy and also your depth of research, just how accurate I find, or how much I related to it
Mm.
in so many details. And of course, every person's experience is going to be different and unique, of course, but
Mm.
there were just elements that I just thought, gosh, I can't imagine how you could conjure that if you haven't experienced it. So
Yeah,
it is like when you got in touch with your story, I was just kind of incredulous, really. Like you
yeah,
said, you said that you felt that you almost, but in a way, by investigating this subject and writing a play about it and researching, it's like you were shielded. And I can
yeah,
completely understand that, of
yeah,
course, because it is just extraordinary that it happened, and so soon after as well. It's
yeah. I hadn't clocked how soon afterwards that it had happened actually until today. Um, but yeah, no, no. And I haven't told any of the people that I met through the play that we've now experienced it.
really right.
And I'm not sure why, but I feel like it's not like I know. I think maybe a horrid way. I remember at the beginning when we thought it could happen. I just remember thinking, I don't want to be in this club. I don't want to be in this club. Um, this is not the club I'm meant to be in. And then wanting to very much separate myself from it. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, I remember when the PR, we were having meetings with PR about stillbirth, about the play,
Mm.
and they'd be like, oh, it's such a shame you haven't had a stillbirth, because then we could sell it a bit more. you know?
Oh my God. I mean, the cynicism is just
I know, but it's so true. It's so
so
true.
true.
It's so true. And I remember You magazine wanted to do a spread on me and Fiona from a child of mine talking about our stillbirth experiences, and then the PR had to go back to them and say, "Oh, Cordelia didn't have one, has never lost a child, but they're still really up for doing the spread." And then You magazine were like, "Oh no, we don't want it then." And like,
They can't peddle your tragedy.
no,
Yeah.
and then how can you sell it? It can't be good. It's not real. Like,
Oh my God. Well, you know what? Now you've got an even better
I
story.
know. I know they'll be foaming at the mouth when I get in contact if I ever put it on again.
Oh, Jesus. Oh my God.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh, so you're
Um,
pregnant. You're pregnant again now.
I am. Yeah,
Wow.
I'm 21 weeks. And this baby is due on August's birthday. Um, and we found out we were pregnant with this baby on August's due date. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's all very strange. And
Wow.
I remember when I had some bleeding at the beginning, and I thought I had my period, but then the bleeding kind of stopped, and then I found out I was pregnant, but I still had occasional spotting. So we went in to get a scan in hospital, and the first time I'd been back to the hospital since we lost August, and Phil and I were getting a coffee before we went up to the room, and I remember saying to him, God, I hope we don't bump into Galia. And Galia was our consultant throughout the whole thing, every single scan, every single bit of bad news at the birth, after the birth. And I was like, I hope we don't see her. And of course,
Yeah.
there she is getting
Yeah.
a coffee. And I said to her, I really didn't want to see you today. And she said, no, a lot of people don't want to see me ever again. And she gave me like a huge hug, and she said it's all going to be absolutely fine. And she walked off, and this butterfly appeared, and it just stopped in the middle of Phil and I. it was just there, and it felt like it stayed there for 10 minutes. It just stopped. And then it flew away, and it followed her all the way across the road. And we could still see it. And Phil just went to me, "That was August."
Oh my God.
Yeah. And it really, really was. I really mean, it was extraordinary. It really was. And I just remember being so incredibly grateful that I'd lost him in that moment, because if I hadn't have lost him, I never would have seen that and experienced something like that. And I just remember being like, God, grief can be so beautiful. And I just remember feeling so lucky. And I would never have thought that, 3 months ago, but, before that moment.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, it's, and that's what I mean by trauma and power. It's life is different, and it's unfiltered now, and we see more. And that is a privilege, especially because August can't see anything. And I don't know if you had it, but when you go into hospital to be induced, in our situation, you get given a card with a butterfly on it so that they know who you are.
Oh,
and you get sent to a room with a butterfly picture on the door on the front, so that doctors know not to come in.
And then you saw a butterfly.
And then we saw one, on the same day that we saw Galia, who was the last person I wanted to see, who's incredibly busy. And there was a strike on, and I was pregnant, and it was August due date. It's all, I just, I don't want to say I feel so lucky, but I really did then. I really do. And you don't see that if you don't accept the sadness and the fear.
Cordelia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Gosh, I'm sat here by candlelight with a box of tissues.
Wow.
Having to turn away from the mic to blow my nose. You can find Cordelia online on X at Cordelia O'Neill 3 or at smallthingstheatre.com. Please also head to the show notes for links. If you or someone you know has experienced or is experiencing baby loss through late-stage termination, you can find support at ARC, Antenatal Results and Choices, arc-uk.org. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of On the Irregular on Creativity and Grief. Please remember to review and subscribe, as it makes all the difference in helping other listeners find us.